Kate Gray.
Thank you. Do you have the little clicker? Okay. Okay, let's see if I can talk and click through slides at the same time. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. So my name is Kate Gray. As Yvonne said, I am the marketing director for the Charleston Symphony. I've been with the symphony for a year now. It's been one of the best years of my life, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my professional career so far. It's been relatively short, it's about 8 years, but it has included multiple restarts in that time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why it is that I feel that despite some great experience on paper, I spent a long time interpreting the things that I did that I was able to do over the last few years as failures, internalizing a lot of shame, and how in the last couple of years I've been able to get past it. And you can too. So unfortunately, can't see this super well, so you guys are going to miss out on all my great jokes. But I'd like to start with a little poll from the audience. By a show of hands, is there anyone here who has failed at getting a job that they really wanted? Is there anyone here who has always wanted to make a big change in life of some sort and failed at doing so? I definitely have. And I see my two employees over there raising their hands, which makes me a little worried. We'll talk about that later. Okay. And then lastly, is there anyone in the audience who has failed at achieving something that was really important to you? A project, a degree, something at work? Definitely have many times. So I ask this kind of to get those reflective juices flowing. I'm going to stand up here today and tell you my story. It's very personal. It's a little nerve-wracking. But the good thing about talking about failure, I realized, is that if I completely bomb, then it's just more material for the next talk. So I'm going to start by telling, this, if you can't read it, just because I feel the need to share my jokes with you guys. This says A Tale of Four Cities, the Kate Gray story. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my story. I'm going to walk you through my resume, but don't worry. Hopefully it won't be that boring. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I felt like I sucked at everything that I have done so far. And then I'm going to tell you how I got over it and arrived at the promised land, aka a job and a life that I really enjoy. It's pretty tough to see. Okay, so a little bit about my background. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, born and raised. Is there a Tucsonan in the audience? Excellent. But I attended the University of Washington in Seattle. I studied business administration, marketing, international business, Spanish. It was a lot. And I graduated in 2011, which was not a very good year to graduate from college. There was, I think, north of 11% unemployment rate. It was really hard to find a job. And so I struggled for a long time. I was lucky enough right before I graduated to get a job at my university at the special programs office, which is essentially putting together program coordinator to put together programs for incoming exchange students. So I learned a lot, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So when I was offered the opportunity to do an internship after about a year working there with a woman who's a very well-known designer in Seattle, I decided to take it, even though it was, shall we say, only slightly paid. And I decided to do that because I thought, I was still in Seattle at the time. I thought, this is going to be my opportunity to really get my feet wet and maybe get a foot in the door in the marketing and advertising world. So I put in 6 or 7 months with her. And then afterwards, she did everything she could to help me find a job. I interviewed at probably every advertising agency in Seattle. And trust me, there are a lot. And I heard, and this was in 2012, I heard the same thing so many times, which was, we would love to have you on our team if you had 5 years of experience. And it was so demoralizing. I can't tell you how many times I heard that over the course of a few months. And I was essentially unemployed after my time with her. So I was scrambling to find something. And after a few months of doing that, I got to a point where I think I was just too tired to hear, I'm sorry, we love you, but we can't hire you one more time. And so I thought, where's the exact opposite of here? And I came up with Santiago, Chile. So I literally on the other side of the world. So I figured maybe by going down to the other side of the world, I might see if my luck would change as well. So I packed my bags and I headed for Santiago. And I do speak Spanish, and I had been there before. So I at least knew the lay of the land a bit, although I got there without a job or a place to live. I do not recommend doing this. It's going to become a theme of my story. I've done this many times. But do it at your own risk. So I got there, and actually, I was there for about 2.5 years. I had all of the luck in the world. Most of I had spent a long time in Seattle, both as a student and then also in the couple years after having graduated, looking for or making connections with people, and they paid off not in Seattle, but actually once I moved down to Santiago. Within a couple of months, I had somehow scored a job at Microsoft Chile. So I was, for about 2 years, I was a customer marketing manager. I was managing the implementation of many of the marketing campaigns throughout the country of Chile, managing an offshore team in the Dominican Republic. I was 25. I don't know why they gave me that much responsibility, but they did. And I took it and I ran with it. But after a year and a half, 2 years at Microsoft, I kind of started to feel like selling software really wasn't for me. And so I decided to pursue my real passion in life, which I think for a number of years I was scared to admit, even to myself, which is to be a Hollywood screenwriter. So I quit Microsoft. My parents were horrified. And I made a move up to Los Angeles. So I got to LA probably 3.5 years ago now, I guess. I was also lucky there. I was able to find a job with Sony Pictures Animation. And then I went from there to Warner Brothers. And I will tell you in a minute how I got here to Charleston. But I want to show you, or I want to say that despite all of these things, I mean, there's some good stuff on this resume, like I worked at Microsoft. There's some reputable names. There's some big countries. There's there's big countries. There's some big titles, I guess, and I moved to a foreign country. There's a lot of stuff to be proud of, essentially. And yet, dang, I really wish you could see this better. And yet, this is how I want to show you how it actually felt in my head as I was going through it. You probably can't see this very well. It's so essentially, I want to point out the fact that I was, this here says, hated my major, depressed, unemployed, broke, fetching coffee for a living, depressed, unemployed, and broke, which was when I made the transition from LA to Charleston about a year and a half ago. And so just to give you an idea, the reason that I felt this way, I mean, I felt terrible about the fact that I had committed to a major that I just didn't feel like was right for me. I internalized a lot of shame about the fact that I made so many moves from one place to another at breakneck speed. I think in the last 8 years that I've lived in 4 or 5 places. And then I moved to LA, having quit Microsoft and an excellent job and a wonderful life in Santiago that I had built for myself. I told everyone who would listen that I was going to be a screenwriter, and that so help me God, it's the only thing I'm going to do with my life, and I was born to be a screenwriter, and someday you will see my name in lights. And so I arrived with a bang in LA and assumed that it would only be a matter of months before I found myself on one of the, working for an HBO show or the next Spielberg film or, something that's felt very big and momentous. And so, of course, imagine my surprise when instead, a matter of months after moving to LA, I found myself working on the Emoji Movie. That's right. If you can't see that there, that's an 8% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The movie that has a lower approval rating than cockroaches, the DMV, Congress, and Donald Trump. And and so I found myself, as you can imagine, thinking, what in the world did I just do? I just gave up a wonderful life in Santiago, a career path that provided health insurance, and so here I am working in LA, and I just didn't like it. And so I got to a point where, back to my resume. I got to a point where after a couple years in LA, I felt like it just wasn't right for me. Although I didn't quite know that yet. I just knew that something wasn't working. So, a spring of 2017, I came here to visit a friend who's actually in the audience today. And she and I had lived together in Santiago, and we became good friends and stayed in touch, even though both of us moved back to separate coasts in the US. And being from Charleston, I decided to come and stay with her for a few weeks, telling myself I was going to work on some scripts. That was a big lie. And that I was just going to clear my head and take a few weeks out of LA and then go back feeling refreshed and have a kind of a restart there. What ended up happening is I fell in love with Charleston. It had many of the things that LA didn't, or at least things that I needed: a sense of community, everything being close by, good food, and then I had a crisis because I had already restarted so many times in life. And I already felt like such a failure. I had internalized all this shame from the fact that no matter where I was, what job I was in, I mean, you name it, going from the tech industry to animation, there's not a bigger 180 than that. And yet, just for whatever reason, every direction I went, I just felt like it wasn't right for me. And so, like every good story, this one has a road trip montage. So I want to tell you a little bit about how it is that I was able to get over this, and a little bit and why I believe it was an integral part of me getting to where I am today, which is happy is the answer. And it's because, so I had been in Charleston for a few months at this point. This is last year. What was supposed to be a month-long trip here turned into 2 to 3 to 4. I kept pushing it back, and because I wasn't working in LA anymore, I was able to do that. And then the end of the summer came, and I kind of had to decide whether I was going to fish or cut bait and either move back to LA or stay in Charleston. And I decided to stay in Charleston. I thought, you know what, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So I bought a one-way plane ticket to Los Angeles. I went and I packed up my little Prius with all my earthly belongings, and I set off on a road trip across the southern US by myself, with the intention of coming back and setting up a life and looking for a job here in Charleston. And so when I was in LA, I had the good fortune to talk to a friend of mine there who, in being very supportive of my move, he said, at some point while you are on your road trip, I highly recommend that you turn your phone off, or which these days is basically airplane mode, and turn the music down and just be with yourself and your thoughts for a little while. He suggested, why don't you pretend that there's an older or a younger version of yourself in the passenger seat, and what would you say to her, and what would the conversation sound like? And so I embarked on my road trip. I put his suggestion in the back of my mind. And over the course of the few days that I traveled by myself from LA to Charleston, it's about 2,500 miles, I kept putting this off, and I kept putting it off. And then finally on the last day, the last leg of the road trip, I was crossing the border from Georgia into South Carolina. I knew that I only had a couple hours left in this road trip, and my friend's thoughts came back to the forefront of my mind. And I thought, you know what, it's now or never. Even though I've been in Charleston for a few months by now, this is my moment of actually arriving there as it being my new official home. So why not do a little bit of exploring? So as I was crossing the border, it's sunset and it was beautiful out, and I turned the music down, I put my phone away, and I started to think. And what ended up coming up, I didn't end up talking to an older or younger version of myself, but I ended up talking to my current self. And I went through and I thought about every single thing here, everything that I've shown you on this resume that caused a sense of internalized shame or a sense of depression, a sense of not being good enough, a sense of failure. And I went one by one and I said out loud to myself, I forgive you for each one of these things. And it wasn't necessarily a forgiveness for the action itself. There's a lot to be proud of in the actions that I have done. But it was a forgiveness for letting it weigh so heavily on me and for turning it into a story where in which the things that I did were negatives and not positives. And it sounds cliche, I kid you not, I felt 100 pounds lighter by the time I got a couple hours later, by the time I pulled up at my new house here in Charleston. And I went on to look for jobs. It took me 2 or 3 months throughout the late summer and into the fall. I started looking for a position here in Charleston. And I was reflecting on what it was that allowed me to get rid of all of these things that I was feeling that I had internalized for so long. And I thought, you know what? The first thing that I needed to do was put my phone away. And I know that this is a hot topic these days. Everyone's talking about this. There's a big movement to disconnect, and I think it's for a reason. I think it's because when you're focused on your phone and on what's going on in everyone else's life, it's distracting you from focusing on what's going on in your own life. And then I let all that shit go. And it's not to say I did it overnight and you can too, because I didn't. It was years and years worth of internalized shame, and it was months and months worth of thinking about it. But I gave myself the space. I found a moment in time to really do it, and I committed. And it sounds so cheesy to say, but I literally said the words out loud to myself, I forgive you, probably 100 times in that car while I was driving towards Charleston. And it worked. And then the last thing is, and this kind of brings me up till now, is I realized that afterwards I need to own my story. And regardless of whether it might seem like I moved from one city or country to the next at breakneck pace, whether I couldn't commit to any sort of a job or a career path, all these things that were making me feel depressed, working on the Emoji Movie. The fact is that those are all things that I did, and those are all things that have added to my ability to be a hopefully excellent employee and a good person. Those are not, it's not things to feel shameful about. They're not things that detract from me as a person. They are assets. I've gone up against a lot of adversity in my life. Much of it has been internal. And I have gotten to a place where I'm able to see my ability to overcome some of these things, especially obstacles that I have set up for myself, as an asset. And I believe I started here when we were Yvonne and I were talking about this lecture I was going to do and talking about the theme of restart. I was going to start, or my initial intention was to talk about it from a professional perspective. But as I was working on this and the story unfolded, I realized it's much more of a personal perspective. It's not necessarily how to talk about your experiences in an interview, which was the original thing I was planning to tell you about. But it's actually how to talk about your experiences with yourself. And so when I saw this, it was about a little over a year ago, I saw an advertisement for the director of marketing role for the Charleston Symphony. And I was deep into my job search at this point, aka kind of depressed. And I saw it and I thought the first thing I thought to myself was, there's no job I want more than that one. Certainly no job in Charleston, and possibly no job ever. I'm a very purpose-driven person, and I need to be doing something that makes me feel like I'm contributing in a positive way to my community. And I knew that it was a role I felt like I could kick ass at, honestly. And then the second thing that crossed my mind was, I'm never going to get that job. I'm probably 10 years too young or 10 years shy on experience, one MBA short, and there's probably 200 people who have applied already. And in a way, all of those things were true. But I decided to apply anyway. And I decided when I applied that if I was going to apply for the role that I absolutely wanted, for what I had decided at this moment in life was my dream job du jour, that I was going to go at it with 100%. So I studied classical music marketing trends. Believe it or not, there are trends in classical music marketing. Um, and I studied the Charleston Symphony, and I studied everything about it, and I came more prepared for that interview than any other interview in my life. But I would say at least 50% of that preparation that I did for that interview was internal preparation. It was working on my own story, understanding what were the actual assets that I gained from moving so many times in a short period of time. What were the actual things that I learned from all of these jobs, and what would make me a unique employee and a person to work with because of them. And so I'm happy to announce that you probably can't see this at all, but this is a much happier version of my resume. All of these sad red things are crossed out with happy blue things. This one says, where it said broke, I was particularly proud of this one. Where it says broke, this one it says good with small budgets. Hated college and major, stuck with it anyway. And fetching coffee for a living, unpretentious, and excellent coffee maker. So, in summary, this was my version of a restart, or of multiple restarts. And I'm very grateful for it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, but I don't want this to be necessarily all about me. Everyone has to go on their own journey. Everyone has to do their own version of the I forgive you talk in whatever form it takes. But it occurred to me that on this slide right here, these 3 things that I was able to identify allowed me to put myself in a position where I was able to do this internal work. I would like to extend that to all of you in the audience as well, at least this first one, which is giving you a moment, a space to appreciate to build in some quiet reflection in your life. Which is why, as Director of Marketing for the Symphony, I'd like to offer everyone here 2 free tickets to this weekend's performance of the Symphony of Mendelssohn and Grieg at the Gilliard Center. Thank you. So our marketing coordinators are over there ready to take everyone's information. If you can go and sign up, your name will be on a list at will call, so you can go. It's a little bit last minute, but I've learned from this job that Charleston is very much a last minute town. So it gives me a heart attack every week. But so for anyone who doesn't have plans either tonight or tomorrow, all you have to do is show up at will call, the Gilliard, give them your name and show your ID, and you will have 2 tickets waiting for you for a performance. And I highly recommend, this is something I try to do when it seems like there's a night where I won't have fires to put out. I like to put my phone away and actually put it on airplane mode when I walk in, and tell myself that I'm not going to look at my phone until I walk out, even at intermission. And I highly recommend that you go. It's going to be some great music this weekend, and go and let your mind wander. Listen to some of the best classical music you'll ever hear from the incredible musicians at the Charleston Symphony. And I'm not a musician, so I can say that. And just maybe start on this path of reflection and what it is that you might feel that you need to forgive yourself for, or a way to start thinking about your experiences so that they're not shameful, they're not failures, but they're actually assets. Thank you.
Nice. Let me give it back to you, too. That was a beautiful story. I think I learned a lot just from that personal experience of yours. I hope you guys did too. We can do a little Q&A while we got a little bit more time. Are you okay with answering some questions, Kate? So,
sure. Yeah, no, a huge role. Yeah, sure. So she asked, what role did friends and family play in this process for myself? And I'm very much the sort of person where I like to talk about my feelings. So I will probably talk my friends' ears off as if they'll let me. And I think that certainly friends are wonderful in terms of giving you an outside perspective on your life. They know you, they love you, so they want the best for you. So I think that talking to my friends and family helped set me up to be in a place where I realized that I felt loved, I felt supported, I felt like if I went out and failed again and again and again, I continue to do this, there will be people there for me. Um, and it allowed me, as such, to it kind of set me up so that I could start doing this work for myself. Anyone else? Yes. Ooh, that's an excellent question. Did I feel confident with the decisions as I was making them? No. Um, Probably no is the short answer. I realized that it's taken me a long time to realize that there is no such thing as a right decision. There's just the decision that you make and then you own it. And I have had to learn that personally, I've had to learn it professionally. And I realized that this is actually is wisdom from my mom, but I apply it to my life all the time. She says if something satisfies, we call it the 51% rule. If something satisfies 51% of what you're looking for, then it's probably a good choice. Because nothing in life is binary. There's never going to be a decision you make or something you do or a path you go down that's all good or all bad. Everything we do in life has some good and some bad. But if it satisfies a majority of what you're looking for, then it's probably a good idea. Yes.
So I know you've done already some amazing work with the symphony so far, and you've only been here, a year maybe, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that work that you're doing with the symphony and like expanding it to a different demographic to say?
Absolutely. And way to bring it back to you, Yvonne. uh, can you talk about me, please? Um, uh, no, but I'm actually glad that you said that because well, the reason I'm joking about that is because Yvonne and I have been working very closely together over the last 6 or 8 months. He did our rebrand for us. Woo woo. Yeah. So that nice logo you see right there, that was him. All of this beautiful artwork when you go and sign up to get your tickets after this, all of that was done by him, that Mendelssohn and Grieg poster. Everything that's on our website, it's all Yvonne. And I could not be happier for his involvement with the symphony. I think the stuff he's doing is awesome. Um, the answer to your question is when I started a year ago, the organization is under incredible leadership. And one thing that you might not know about the symphony or symphonies in general is, it's common knowledge that most symphonies are struggling these days. Most symphonies find themselves sometimes with a bit of an operating deficit at the end of the year. They're in the red instead of in the black. The Charleston Symphony, we're happy to say we've just completed our 8th consecutive year in the black with an operating surplus. I am not responsible for that, but I am very, very proud and thankful to work with the people who are responsible for it. But there's always a moment where we have to ask ourselves, how do we get the next generation of people to enjoy classical music? And it's difficult. It's something that most people age into. But when you're thinking about what to do with your weekend, and I know this goes for me as well. I mean, at least it did before I started working in classical music. But I wouldn't necessarily think of the symphony as an option, even though I've actually always been a fan of classical music. We grew up listening to quite a bit of it in my home. But it's not on my radar. And because we're a nonprofit, we have a very small budget and it's difficult to get in front of people. So it's always one of the biggest challenges of my job is to figure out how to get new audiences into the Gilliard for our shows without really having very much money to do so, to let them know what's going on. So I wish I had all the answers to that right now, but all I can say is that we're very focused as an organization on being able to get out towards people who wouldn't necessarily go, even if it's just once a season. I highly recommend that you come, and you get to come now for free. And if you like it, please tell your friends and family about it. It's a really enjoyable experience. It's nowhere near as intimidating as you might think. And when you go, you're going to find that there's a lot of very friendly faces and that the quality of the music is incredible. We actually punch above our weight for a city the size of Charleston. Most of the soloists who come through town, when they're rehearsing with us, they go, "Oh, whoa! I did not expect a symphony from the size of Charleston to be this good." So we actually produce a great product. I have no idea if that answered your question, but anyone else? Yes. Interesting question. Get a flip phone. Um, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know at all about any official movements for that. I think it's a wonderful idea. Maybe we should talk about how to make that happen. Um, are you raising your hand in the back? Sure. Yeah, I think it's like anything in life. It's baby steps. We're not going to get off. We're not going to completely eschew smartphones from our life from one moment to the next, nor should we necessarily. But I think it's about building in moments. I do this sometimes where I'll just put my phone down and say I'm not going to look at it for a half hour or something. And I'm not necessarily as good at it as I would like to be, but I am actively working on it, which is why even when I'm working, even though I'm on the job at the symphony, it's the sort of thing where it is an opportunity for me. I know that I'm where I need to be. I'm at work. I know where my employees and my boss are at all times, so there's no one who needs to contact me during those 2 hours. So why not put my phone on airplane mode so that I won't be tempted to look at it when it buzzes, and then just forget about it, or even just leave it at home. It's little things like that I think are possibilities. Yeah. Oh, that's such an excellent question. I'm not necessarily. I think probably the short answer is that a bit of it has been serendipitous. When I moved to Santiago, if you ever move abroad, I highly recommend spending time with people who live there and are from there, because that's really where you'll get the experience of that kind of flavor of the culture. But then also supplementing it by spending time with other expats who have moved there as well. I think research has actually shown that when you go through an intense event with someone, it makes you closer faster. And trust me, living abroad is an intense event. So I became friends with my group of expat friends almost instantaneously. And we didn't have to have anything in common other than the fact that we were just all there trying to get through the day one day at a time in Chile. Okay. No, please come to the symphony. Please come up and talk to us. My team and I will be over there. Would love to field any questions you have, either about my talk or about classical music. And please come see us. I really don't mean this to be a commercial. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. It has helped me tremendously to be involved with classical music, and I hope that it will for you too. Thank you.
Thank you.